I'm a college student who cycles to campus every day. It's not a long ride, but I have to go through an area where it's illegal to ride on the sidewalk, so I'm forced to use the road. Most drivers don't mind and just go around me since I stay at the edge and try not to be a nuisance. I ride an old e-bike for my commute, which becomes important later. A few weeks ago, this guy in a Ford SUV started yelling at me while I was in the road-only zone. He was shouting all the usual stuff, telling me to get off the road and that roads were for cars. He also yelled that I was too slow. I hear this kind of thing from drivers pretty often, so I usually just ignore it and keep going. But this guy was different. After yelling, he cut right in front of me and slammed on his brakes. I managed to stop before hitting him, and he sped off, shouting a warning that I should be more careful next time. I was pretty angry, but I hadn't got his license plate or anything. I figured nothing could be done about it anyway since there was no real proof. During lunch, I told my friend who works as an emergency medical technician about what happened. He got really mad and told me he's seen the nasty results of cars successfully brake-checking cyclists. 2 days later, the same jerk in the Ford SUV tried to brake-check me again. I was ready for it when I heard him yelling from behind, ordering me to get on the sidewalk. I avoided crashing again. I told my emergency medical technician friend about it over lunch, and he was even angrier than before. I wanted to let it go since I couldn't really do anything about the guy, and my bicycle wasn't going to win in a crash. This guy kept trying to brake-check me every few days during my morning commute whenever we ended up on the same stretch of road. About a week later, my emergency medical technician friend told me he'd shared my story with one of his buddies in the campus police. The police officer was just as upset about it. They wanted to catch this jerk driver. The plan was to have the officer parked on the side of the road, hoping to catch and pull over the guy. I was all for it, and the officer arranged to be posted on that stretch of road for speeder catching duty. A few uneventful days passed with no sign of the road rager. I saw the cop parked in the same spot every day where the road has a left turn lane and a straight lane. Finally, one morning I'm pedaling along, and I hear that familiar voice. The SUV guy was yelling at me to get off the road again, calling me a jerk. I yelled back, challenging him to catch me. Then I took off. I was pedaling as hard as I could and maxed out the throttle on my e-bike. I guess this made the driver even angrier because I heard his engine roar as he chased after me. He moved into the left lane while I stayed in the right. I looked to the side and saw this nasty-looking old man in the driver's seat with his passenger window open. His mouth was moving like he was yelling, but I couldn't hear him over the wind. When we approached the spot where the police car was parked, I started to slow down. The driver took this chance to swing right in front of me. I don't know if it was his speed or his anger that made him swing so wide, but he cut across my lane and crashed straight into the back of the police car. I barely had time to slow down to about 15 miles per hour before I crashed into the side of his car. The officer got out looking absolutely furious and called for an ambulance and another police car. Luckily, no one was seriously hurt since the jerk was only going about 25 miles per hour, but the impact was enough to set off the SUV's airbags. It turned out the guy was driving drunk. Who drinks before 9 a.m.? He got arrested for that, plus making an illegal lane change and probably other stuff too. I don't know all the details, but I'm pretty sure causing a crash like that would lead to some extra charges. The guy had to pay for extensive repairs on the police cruiser and buy me a new e-bike to replace the one he destroyed when he cut in front of me. The frame of my old bike had snapped. On top of that, I heard his car was declared totaled by his insurance company because the airbags went off, so he has to pay for a new car too. With any luck, he'll lose his license from the drunk driving charges and won't be able to harass cyclists again. It's crazy how one person's entitlement and road rage can lead to so much trouble. I'm just glad that nobody got seriously hurt and that there's one less dangerous driver on the road now. It was supposed to be a relaxing New Year's getaway. My family and I have been looking forward to our annual ski trip to Vermont for months. We own a condo in an 8-unit complex there, and it's always been a great place to unwind and hit the slopes. This year, though, things took an unexpected turn. We arrived at the condo complex on a chilly January evening. The parking lot was pretty full, with most units occupied for the holidays. After a long day of traveling and skiing, we just wanted to unload our gear and settle in for the night. We found a spot close to the stairs and parked there to make unloading easier. A few hours later, my brother went down to grab something from the car. When he came back, he was holding a cardboard sign with a puzzled look on his face. He told us we wouldn't believe what someone had left on our car. He held up the sign. In messy handwriting, it read, "Reserved parking for Unit 8. Handicapped." The misspelling was hard to miss. I expressed my confusion, stating that there were no reserved spots here and that it had always been first come, first served. My dad, who owns the complex, looked confused too. He explained that Unit 8 was the small ground floor unit and that a young couple had been renting it for about a year. He mentioned he'd only met them briefly, but they seemed odd. We shrugged it off, figuring it was just a misunderstanding. But 20 minutes later, when I went to grab my forgotten gloves from the car, things escalated quickly. As soon as I unlocked the car and the lights flashed, I heard angry shouting from Unit 8's window. A man's voice yelled at me, threatening to have the car towed if we didn't move it by morning. The guy sounded completely unhinged. I could tell he was on something, so I ignored him, grabbed my gloves, and hurried back to our condo. When I told my dad what happened, he'd had enough. He announced he was going down there to sort this out. He went to Unit 8 and knocked on the door. We could hear the conversation from our balcony. The man rudely asked what my dad wanted. My dad politely tried to explain that there were no reserved parking spots and that it had always been first come, first served. The man reacted angrily, insisting it was a handicapped spot and threatening to call the landlord about the situation. My dad looked taken aback. He'd lost a lot of weight due to cancer treatment, and his appearance had changed quite a bit. The renter clearly didn't recognize him as the owner. As my dad was about to reveal his identity, he noticed something on a table inside the unit, a pipe that looked suspiciously like drug paraphernalia. Given the renter's erratic behavior, things suddenly clicked into place. My dad decided to disengage and came back to our condo. He called the police, explained the situation, and mentioned what he'd seen inside the unit. About 30 minutes later, we saw police cars pull up. The officers spoke with the male renter for a while. Then, based on my dad's tip, one of them spotted the pipe, now out in the open with a bag next to it. It turned out they were smoking crack. Both the man and woman from Unit 8 were arrested on the spot. The next day, my dad started the eviction process. They'd clearly violated the terms of their lease. We ended up having to renovate the entire unit afterward. Who knows how long they'd been using drugs in there. The whole situation was surreal. Here we were, just trying to enjoy a family ski trip, and suddenly, we're in the middle of a drug bust. The entitled behavior of those renters was mind-boggling. They didn't even have any disabilities. They just wanted a convenient parking spot and thought they could bully their way into getting one. We kept that misspelled cardboard sign. It now hangs in our condo's living room, a reminder of the craziest New Year's trip we've ever had. I'm glad my dad handled the situation the way he did. He could have confronted them about the drugs right away, but by involving the authorities, he ensured that everything was dealt with properly and legally. It's been a few years since that incident, and our ski trips have thankfully been much less eventful. But every time we park in that gravel lot, we can't help but chuckle at the memory of the handicapped sign, and the entitled couple who thought they could claim ownership of a parking spot they didn't own in a complex they only rented in. I grew up in a tight-knit neighborhood in the 1970s. My family wasn't rich, but we got by. My parents worked hard to provide for me and my younger brother. I was a typical teenager, rebellious, always looking for excitement. That's how I stumbled into the mess with the local pizza shop. When I was 15, the pizza place around the corner had been there forever. The owner was this gruff, middle-aged guy who always seemed annoyed when customers came in. One day, I overheard some older kids talking about how they got beer there. Being the dumb teenager I was, I decided to try my luck. To my surprise, it worked. The owner didn't even bat an eye when I asked for a six-pack. He just grabbed it from the cooler, took my money, and sent me on my way. It became a regular thing, not just for me, but for a lot of kids in the neighborhood. My mom found out eventually. She was furious. I'll never forget the day she stormed into that pizza shop. She angrily confronted the owner about selling alcohol to her underage son, demanding that he stop immediately. The owner rudely dismissed her concerns, telling her it was his business and he could do whatever he wanted. He then told her to get out and not come back. My mom warned him that if he ever sold beer to me again, it would be the end of his days in the neighborhood. But a month later, she found beer under my bed. She confronted me and I spilled everything. Turns out the owner was selling to kids as young as 8 even after hours. It was way worse than anyone realized. My dad tried going to the police, but they brushed him off. That's when my mom got that look in her eye, the one that meant she was cooking up a plan. She sternly told me to never buy beer from that place again and to stay out of the shop completely, warning that bad things were going to happen. I didn't know what she meant, but I knew better than to cross her. Months passed and nothing happened. Summer came around again, and I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing. Then one sweltering July night, it went down. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep because of the heat, when I heard a loud crash. I ran to the window and couldn't believe my eyes. A snowplow, in the middle of summer, was ramming into the front of the pizza shop. It smashed into the storefront 3 times before speeding off like nothing happened. The next day, the neighborhood was buzzing. Everyone was talking about the mysterious snowplow attack. The pizza shop owner was freaking out, yelling at the cops. He desperately pleaded with the police to do something, pointing out the extensive damage and questioning who would drive a snowplow in July. The officer tried to calm him down, suggesting that maybe he was mistaken and it was just a regular truck. The owner exclaimed that he couldn't be mistaken as the entire front of his shop was destroyed. But the cops didn't seem too interested in investigating. It was like they were purposely looking the other way. The owner didn't have good insurance, and within a week the shop was closed for good. It wasn't until years later that I learned the truth. My mom had orchestrated the whole thing. She knew a guy who needed cash, and he had a friend with access to the county snowplows. She'd waited almost a year to strike, making sure everyone had forgotten about her threat. The mothers in the neighborhood kept it a secret. They all knew what had happened, but no one said a word. They were just glad the guy who'd been selling booze to their kids was gone. I'm still amazed at how my mom pulled it off. She may have bent some rules, but in her mind she was protecting not just me, but all the kids in the neighborhood. That pizza shop owner thought he was untouchable, making money off of children's bad habits. But he learned the hard way. You don't mess with a determined mom. The shop stayed closed after that. Eventually, a family-friendly diner opened in its place. Whenever we'd go there for dinner, my mom would get this little smile on her face. It was her way of saying, "I told you so." To this day, it remains a legend in our family. The time Grandma took down a crooked business with a snowplow in July. I've always been fascinated by cars. As a kid, I'd spend hours in my dad's garage watching him tinker with engines and fix up old clunkers. That's what inspired me to become a mechanic. I started out small, just doing oil changes and basic maintenance, but I was determined to learn everything I could about cars. After high school, I got a job at a local auto shop. I'd spend my days changing oil, rotating tires, and doing simple repairs. In my free time, I studied for my Automotive Service Excellence ASE certification. It was tough, but I knew it would be worth it in the long run. One day, about 6 months into my job, this old guy comes in. He's driving a beat-up sedan that's seen better days. As soon as he pulls up, I can hear the brakes grinding. It's not a good sound. The old guy asks about getting new brake pads and how much it would cost. I tell him I'll take a look and bring the car into the shop. I start to drive the car in, and man, those brakes are screaming. I know right away it's more than just pads. I get it up on the lift and take the wheels off. What I see makes me wince. The rotors are completely shot. There's no brake surface left at all. It's worn down to the cooling fins in the middle. I go find my manager to explain the situation. I tell him about the problem with the sedan, mentioning that the rotors are completely gone, and it needs more than just pads. My manager nods and goes to talk to the customer. I watch from a distance as he explains the situation and even takes the old guy out to show him the damage. But this guy isn't having it. The old guy accuses us of trying to rip him off. He insists he knows what his car needs and demands we just do the pads like he asked. My manager tries to calmly explain that it's a serious safety issue and we can't just put new pads on these rotors. The old guy gets even angrier, telling us to do what he says or he'll take his business elsewhere. My manager stays cool through all of this. When the old guy finally runs out of steam, my boss does something I'll never forget. He calmly informs the old guy that he can't let him drive the car as it is because it's not safe. He explains that he'll have to red flag it unless the customer agrees to the proper repairs. The old guy looks like he's about to burst a blood vessel. He yells that we can't do that, it's his car, and threatens to call the cops. My manager calmly replies that it's the customer's right to do so and offers to call them himself. Next thing I know, my boss is on the phone with the State Highway Patrol. When they show up, he walks them through the damage, explaining everything. The troopers take one look at those rotors and shake their heads. The trooper confirms that the mechanic is right. He tells the old guy that the vehicle isn't safe to drive and he needs to either get it fixed here or have it towed to another shop. The trooper makes it clear they can't let him drive it like this. The old guy is fuming, but he's out of options. He storms out saying he'll be back. A few days later, he shows up with a tow truck. He's going to pay to have it towed rather than just get it fixed properly. The tow probably cost more than the new rotors would have. I never saw the old guy again. Maybe next time he'll listen to the experts instead of assuming everyone's out to get him. Or maybe he'll just find a less scrupulous mechanic who'll do whatever he says. Either way, I sleep better at night knowing I didn't let an unsafe car back on the road.